The assisted dying bill is due to be read a third time tomorrow in an extra Keys sitting, and the agenda asks what the rush is. We also ponder whether Tynwald and government are capable of delivering a bus station in Douglas, why developers need support to build luxury flats in Port Erin, and why Tynwald rejected the opportunity to save money by allowing private members' bills to appear on the government consultation website. But first, Russian MHK Michelle Haywood tells us why the extra Keys sitting was needed to consider the assisted dying bill. What is the particular rush to get this third reading through?
I don't think it's a rush, actually. So the letter that's recently gone is I think that's the third letter where we've asked for additional sittings. And originally the ask was for whatever business was left over from the 25th of June, that we would have additional sittings on the 9th and the 23rd to complete the business on the order paper. What we've seen in Keys, and you've seen Keys sitting for all day and managing to deal with a clause and then move on to it. We have had extensive hours of discussion. There's no rush necessarily, but we have considered everything. We have debated, I think, those clauses in more detail than any piece of legislation that I've had to deal with since I was elected. And in fact, if you talk to the members who were in the last administration, they say, even the abortion bill didn't get this level of discussion around it, even though it was an equally emotive subject. So there has been lots of time for consideration there. There's been lots of in-depth discussion about every single bit of those clauses, and every subsection has been pored over. So I don't think that we are rushing anyone into a decision, because I actually think Keys has considered this in so much detail now. So there was always an intention that there would be a sitting on the 23rd to carry on with business, and it was just felt that, having dealt now with clauses, this would have been the logical next step. We knew that there was a sitting scheduled. The letter went into the Speaker just to confirm that sitting was still going to go ahead, and it's a chance to bring the third reading through.
And yet, you've gone through clauses stage. There will have been amendments made. In fact, I know there have been amendments made during that extensive deliberation. So the last sitting that considered the bill in terms of clauses stage was it the 1st of July? It was certainly early in July.
The 9th of July was where Mr Hooper's new clause was inserted.
Okay, so 9th of July. You've had quite a lot on in terms of the Tynwald Day celebrations. You've got a reasonably busy sitting of Tynwald to prepare for, and then you will have this additional sitting at the end, the week after Tynwald. You won't have had an awful lot of time to sit down and actually look at the completed revised, amended bill and say, actually, do these amendments all work together? Does it all fit? You've considered each as individual parts, but you haven't had a chance really to do that pondering and say, does this all work now as a bill?
So as we've been going through the bill and we've passed various amendments to various bits, we have had Dr Allinson arrange for us to have an update of what it looked like so far. So actually we have seen that bill as it's progressed through, and we've made amendments, and we've got the last clause to slot into it. There are only 16 clauses in the bill. So I take your point. Have members considered how all of those parts that now we've amended them fit together? I think a lot of that did happen as we went through. So you saw, particularly with Mrs Corlett's amendment to remove doctor administered medication, that actually the consequences of that we dealt with as we went through the different clauses. So you could see, once we had that first debate on her first amendment, the consequential changes had already been considered, and that was part of what we discussed on the 9th of July, was just further advice from the Attorney Generals about how we were going to change. But some of the clauses are really, really short, and there isn't very much in them anyway. So I think overall it's not a massive piece of legislation to look at, and I would expect that my fellow members are quite well conversant with looking at legislation by now. We're 3 years in, and this is a fairly short bill. Because we've done so much scrutiny on it, there's been lots of discussion about each of those. I'm anticipating that they're more than capable of managing to read and understand the bill at this stage.
Next up, Enterprise Minister Tim Johnston, MHK. There was a fairly lively exchange during question time, particularly in relation to this question about the luxury flats in Port Erin and the subsidy, effectively, the Manx taxpayer is giving to that development. It's quite hard, I think, for many people in the Isle of Man to understand why it's a good idea to subsidise a development which is effectively for for luxury flats. Surely to goodness, luxury flats, you could just put the price up and you can charge what you need to charge for a luxury flat.
Yeah, and I hear that, Phil, but I think, again, it was interesting listening to sort of how the debate and the questions panned out this morning. And it's not. I think it's understanding what is a broader challenge for government, and we recognise that housing, for example, is a big issue, and affordable housing and the challenges around that, and making sure that we've got enough housing for everybody for the future is incredibly important. That's a wide sweeping policy. That includes issues that's going on in, say, in Treasury, with looking at disincentives, on looking at empty properties, working with the Housing Communities Board and the challenges and the work they're doing around the assessment of housing need. So there's that big, broad policy going on. Now, within that, and within the economic strategy specifically, there is this challenge, and it came from the last election, about what we call these unoccupied urban sites. These are sites that have been sitting empty. We've all seen them over the years. And Douglas, people ask questions why the Villiers is a classic example, sitting there 20 years plus, nothing happening. So it's understanding about why is that happening? Why aren't those sites being developed? And these sites are privately owned. People who own these sites have choices. They have choices where they invest their money. Now, I'm sorry, ultimately, I know people don't like talking sometimes about these sort of things, but the reality is they have choice. They can put the money in the bank. They could invest it off island, or they could invest it on the island. What we're wanting them to do is invest on the island. And the reason they're not investing on those sites is because they're not viable. For them, they're not profitable enough. But we're wanting to see these sites developed. We're wanting to see the infrastructure built that we want to see for families. We want for our visitor economy. We want to see more hotels. We want to see better office spaces. We want to see more flats. We want to see cinemas, all the things that we want to see on an island. If we can unlock those sites and get those things developed, that is for the benefit of everybody. And the whole principle of the grant scheme is saying, okay, this site isn't viable. Government will put a small percentage into that, but no monies will be paid out to anybody until that development is completed. And if over that period that site becomes profitable, then there won't be any money paid out at all. But in the meantime, what we've done is you stimulated the economy, you've started construction. That's people working, that's tax, that's insurance, that's VAT, that's people working in the industry, that's people paying for sandwiches, going down to the pub, all the things that what we're wanting to see develop on the island and that construction industry move forward. And at the end of it, we've got some of the infrastructure that as an island we want to see. So on that basis, it's a part of a bigger picture, and it's DFE's part through the Island Infrastructure Scheme to develop the full range of things that we need to see on the island.
I suppose, though, the difficulty that you have as a minister, and indeed Council of Ministers has, with this is the perception. At the last election, almost everybody who stood for election was talking about the housing crisis that affects the Isle of Man. I don't think many people were concerned that people who could afford luxury flats were going to be unable to buy luxury flats. I think most people's concern was about that sort of lower middle range of properties. So if nothing else, this doesn't look particularly good that one of the biggest tranches of money that's been released or that's being made available at least for development is at that luxury flat end. Can you understand maybe that perception-wise that's not so good?
I understand that. I think it's also obviously the way the question has been framed as well. I mean, again, I would take it back to the point. If you look at the site in Port Erin, that's a site, again, that's been sitting empty for many, many years, owned by a developer. So it either sits empty, looking unsightly, or we say, well, what can we do to get something built here? And that's the point. The question then is, well, do we need flats on the island? Yes, we do need flats. Do we need affordable flats? Yes, but we also need the full range. Just like we need the full range of, you look at a housing estate that's built on the island. It's the full range of properties. So we need everything. So from that basis, I don't have an issue in that sense. And of course, we're looking at this one particular application in isolation. As you're aware, the scheme was open for a short period of time. We had a lot of interest, and we've got some really big schemes now over the line, the Villiers, at Lake Road, so some really, really positive schemes. We've now reopened the scheme for a 12-month period. We are wanting to encourage further input, more applications coming in from around the island for all sorts of different developments. Some of those developments may well include affordable housing. So I think it's important that we're not just looking at one particular project. We realise that, yes, that is a relevant project, but there's a whole range of scenarios where this scheme would be relevant for.
And I suppose from a government perspective, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't, in as much as, I suppose, and maybe you can correct me on this, the thinking was we need to be demonstrating as a new government that we are making a difference, and obviously splashing the cash with regards to the various developments that were successful in relation to the initial tranche of money, was demonstrating government's commitment to do something about a stagnant development market.
Yeah, and I think we have to remember that the funding that's been allocated that we tap into is the Economic Strategy Fund. That was the £100 million fund that was set up by the government through the Island Plan, very much about investing in the island and our infrastructure and growing the economy and growing GDP. That's very much where DFE sits in that area and economic development and the strategy. So we're very much tuned into that. But we also have to remember, and when we talk to people on the island, we get the feedback, and people say, we haven't got the attractions that they've got in the UK. We haven't got the facilities. We want to see improvement. This is exactly what we're trying to do, because if we want to have a compelling an exciting and attractive proposition for young people and families and working people on the island, they want to see the facilities that they would expect to get elsewhere, within reason. Obviously, we're a small island. So it's absolutely right that as a government, we're looking at how we do that. And leveraging private investment is not a new concept. It's something that's very common. It goes on in the UK and around the world. It is new to us, and I get that, and I think we're people getting used to that principle. But I think the important thing to remember is any grant that goes into any of these processes, the government will be getting back indirectly through economic activity and exchequer benefit. So we either sit and do nothing and we see these sites not moving, or we do something that stimulates that, gets the things we want to see built on the island for the future, for the community. I think that's what we're trying to do.
Another thing that isn't moving at the moment is a bus from Port Erin to Craignash. Obviously, your department must be interested in getting tourists from places where they can get to on a bus to sites such as Craignash and the Sound, which are certainly among the top attractions on the Isle of Man. At the moment, people arrive in Port Erin and are told, how's your lungs, because you're going to have to walk up a very steep hill to get at first to Craignash and then down a steep hill to get to the Sound. It's not a particularly good introduction for tourists to the island, is it?
No, it's interesting listening to what the Infrastructure Minister had to say about that. Clearly, as you mentioned, Visit have been involved in this process. I've been looking at it. We are very keen to see that link. So I look forward to the consultation that's going on at the moment around buses, and I hope very much through that we do see some constructive work in that area, because I think, like you say, it seems to me pretty illogical that when we're trying to attract people to the island, our transport system, which is actually very, very highly regarded indeed, our railways, our MER, our bus system, it is really, really good. But we need to make sure that we're covering, obviously as cost effectively as we can, the whole island.
Part of the problem seems to be that, and I understand, having been infrastructure minister, how difficult and tight budgets are in that department. But it would appear that the department has looked at the viability of this bus route purely on their internal sort of financial requirements, missing the perhaps the bigger picture point that there's a benefit here, a broader benefit across the island of allowing tourists and some residents to be able to get access to these sites using public transport.
Yeah, and I would fully agree with that. And I think that certainly what Visit are doing now, I think is really, really positive, is the input they put into the sister report looking at heritage transport, because we recognise that there's been too much sort of piecemeal thinking going on. Lots of really good stuff happening in it, but not. It's bringing it together. And I think certainly from a visit agency point of view, understanding the business cases really and looking at it from a bigger picture point of view, I think is really important.
Johnny Farragher was once again calling for a new Douglas bus station at July Tynwald. You're persistent, if nothing else.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to be, really. And I think you have to be with this sort of thing when, as far as I can see, although the DOI minister has said there is work going on in the background, well, I want to see what that work is, and I want us to actually see some fruitful and tangible physical results of that work, so that we can actually start having bus facilities in our capital. I don't think it's that much to ask, and I actually think that the DOI minister is on board with the principle. I think at this point we're kind of just, okay, how are we going to do that? Well, now that we've got a second motion in and we've got some very helpful amendments to say that we will have a debate about that plan. So that plan will now be brought to Tynwald for this December, and there will be a debate. So this time around, hopefully, the DOI can't just say, well, we're waiting on Lord Street, because there was an amendment to say that we shouldn't be waiting on the Lord Street site being completed, which we've been waiting for 22 years for that. So we can't really continue to do that. And secondly, the other amendment to say that we should actually have a debate about that plan that they will bring forward in December of this year. So, keeping everything crossed, and, I'm going to keep in communication with the minister that we will have that debate in December, and we will actually see some movement on this, getting bus facilities in our capital city.
One of your colleagues, Jason Moorhouse, was talking of the spirit of excitement and enthusiasm that there is across the water subsequent to the UK Labour Party getting elected. And he imagined that the Chief Minister and the Treasury Minister returning from their trip to London to see the state opening of Parliament, he imagined that they will come back enthused and actually start making some decisions. Do you think government is too good at considering things and perhaps not good enough at making decisions?
I think my short answer to that would have to be yes. I do think that we can talk a lot. I think what I often notice is that we will talk around an issue that is, if we just pan out a little bit, it's really quite obvious that we need to find a solution and what we need to do, really. And we can get a little bit kind of quagmired in the details. I think if we just pan out a little bit at this particular issue, those Lord Street stops are an embarrassment. That is, the bottom line. All of us will be able to admit, in our heart of hearts, we all know those Lord Street stops, having been there as temporary facilities for 22 years, are an embarrassment. We need to get moving on getting some toilets, getting lighting, getting appropriate seating, getting proper shelter from the weather. All these sorts of things, we need that for our capital city, not just for visitors, but for residents and for bus drivers. So it shouldn't be that hard. We really need to get moving on this.
So what is the problem then? Why, when it is, as you've described, relatively obvious? I mean, it's quite clear something should be done to sort this. I mean, is there a kind of behind the scenes move in Tynwald or mood in Tynwald that suggests that actually we're just humouring Ms Farragher, and we've got no intention of doing this because we don't think it's necessary? Or why do you think that things aren't happening?
I think that we have... So obviously we sold the Lord Street site, and I think that is the crux of this issue. We sold that land and we shouldn't have done. Basically, that is the absolute heart of this matter. We've sold it, and now our bus facilities are in the hands of a private developer, which has been the case for 22 years, and it's fallen through. It's fallen through more than once. So there are now plans in, and I had a look at them last night. They've not long been submitted, so you can see them on the planning website, and it looks really good. It looks like there will be a hub with facilities, and there will be separate shelters for each stop along that Lord Street. Now, if we could say this will be in place by, for example, summer of 2026, then that would be, we would all welcome that, I think. But we don't have any timeline for that. We don't know how long that's going to take. We don't know how many objections there are going to be. The planning process itself is long, and then construction tends to elongate much further than anybody had ever expected. And I think waiting on not just the whims of a private developer, but the whims of the construction industry and of how many people might object to this very ambitious project on Lord Street. All of these factors show that we will have to have an alternative provision in place whilst we await that Lord Street development. And I think that is going to come with some funding implications. But is it not important for us to have a bus station in our capital city after 22 years? I would say yes, it is. I would say this should be a funding priority.
Members have criticised, and the Minister has given a valiant attempt, at least, at a defence of the millions given for the luxury apartment block in Port Erin. It would appear that something like the Lord Street development would be a much better use of public funds, a better targeted use of the Economic Development Fund. Do you think that, well, I suppose it's wrong to prejudge any applications that may or may not be being considered, but would you agree that if government money is to be put into somewhere, that this seems like a better use of public funds? Absolutely
would agree, and I think that was what the DOI Minister said at question time yesterday. It wasn't was it the Economic Initiatives Fund? I'm sorry, I'll have to look back on Hansard, but he did say that this developer was making an application to access some of the government initiative fund there in terms of development. And, if that is in place, if that's approved, actually that does put more robust structures around that contract. So that would actually be a positive for the public of the Isle of Man, I think. So there are definitely, I can see that work is taking place on the part of the DOI and on the part of the new private developer if they do end up purchasing that land. But I think we just need to have that alternative in place, because having waited for so long, and I really do hope as well that the broader lessons of this are learned, that, prime land in the heart of our capital should never be given into the hands of a private developer, with a very weak caveat in that they will provide public facilities. It doesn't work. Keep it public, keep it in our hands.
Finally, Michelle Hayward on her failed bid to get private members' bills back on the government consultation hub.
It was quite simple. They always used to. They have done over a number of years, and it was withdrawn as a route about 2 years ago now. And I thought that was unreasonable, and I thought it should be reinstated. I don't think any of the debate today, anyone managed to give me any evidence as to why it was harmful. There were comments made about blurring the lines between Parliament and government, but I think that was actually relatively easy to overcome. How you brand it, how you label the page. It didn't seem like they were reasonable challenges. And my concern is now that we are requiring Tynwald to spend probably £10,000 a year in order to be able to set up a parallel service, where actually all of that money comes from government revenue anyway. whether it comes via Tynwald or whether it comes via a government department, it's all coming out of the same original pot. And I just feel like we're wasting money now setting up something parallel rather than using our resources to the best effect.
And of course, it's not just the system that's effectively going to be a double handled system. You also have to have officers who have experience and knowledge and training, presumably, in how to handle the data that is provided in a way which is secure and doesn't result in members of the public's rights in relation to their personal information being mishandled.
Yeah, I think the evaluation that's been done by Tynwald officers was actually the software that runs the government consultation hub is set up for the purpose and is the best product. We're just unfortunately now in the position where government have kind of ring-fenced it and said, well, we're using public money to pay for this, but we're not going to allow this other part of government, in the wider sense, to be able to access it. And I think that's really unfortunate.
So what do you think? Still struggling to understand government spending priorities? Keep listening to Agenda and we'll at least ask the questions. Let me know your thoughts on the programme by contacting Phil Gaughan at manxradio.com and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. For now though, I'm Phil Gaughan. Go to Mayo. Thanks for listening.